Good morning, everyone. My name's Tasha Allen, and I'm the Senior Director for Career and Technical Education at the Illinois Community College Board. And I am also the State Post-Secondary Methods of Administration Coordinator, and I will explain here in a second what that means. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is the second in our series about the top 10 documents. And this presentation is specifically about the notices of non-discrimination. So just some really quick background about the top 10 documents. So probably at this point, it was probably about 6 years ago, ICCB worked with our friends and colleagues at the ICSPS to create top 10 documents. And these are specifically regarding grievance processes, notices of non-discrimination, and then website accessibility. And the reason we created these is because while we were conducting our compliance reviews, which I'll get into in a second here, while we were conducting our compliance reviews, we found oftentimes that there were really similar, I don't want to say issues, but findings amongst all of the colleges that we were visiting. And so we thought it would be helpful if we had nice looking, super quick documents, easily digestible, that we could send out to the system so that they would understand, oh, these are the sort of the top things to look for when we're looking at grievance procedures or notices of non-discrimination. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. I wanted to give some quick background before we get into this. So if you are unaware, the ICCB conducts periodic compliance reviews, and compliance is in quotations there because they're less about compliance now and more about technical assistance. Conducts reviews of the Illinois Community College CTE programs to ensure that they're complying with federal civil rights laws. And it is the Methods of Administration, or MOA program, that really gives the ICCB this authority. The MOA framework was laid out in the Vocational Education Guidelines, which I will just refer to as the guidelines from here on out because it's an extremely long name. I will not read it, but it's there linked for you if you wish to visit that, and that's on the OCR's website. The purpose of the MOA program is to ensure that all students, regardless of race, color, national origin, sex, or disability, have equitable access to high-quality CTE programs. And these reviews affect all areas on campus, including admissions, advising, facilities, marketing, classrooms, everything. So some of the examples of what can be reviewed are notices of non-discrimination, grievance procedures, and I'm just seeing that I forgot to bold notices of non-discrimination and unbold grievance procedures, I'm sorry. Recruitment materials, college catalogs, more physical accessibility, things like signs, restrooms, CTE labs, those types of things. So along with the guidelines, we also review compliance with other pertinent civil rights legislation that affects higher education. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which reviews compliance with race, color, and national origin. Title IX of the Education Amendment Acts, which most of you on the call are probably familiar with, and that reviews compliance with sex. Section 504 of the Rehab Act, as well as Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ensures that institutions are not discriminating on individuals based on their status of having a disability or not. Okay, so these are the top 10 documents. So like I said, these documents were created about 6 years ago, and the web accessibility one has been updated since it was initially created. So I'm going to give you a minute. Please take some time to try and locate a notice of non-discrimination policy on your college's website. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. If you can't find it in 30 seconds, that's fine. Just keep looking for it because I'm going to ask you to look at it later on. All right. So like I said, keep looking for that if you can't find it, because we will look at it later on in the presentation. Okay. Okay, so did you know that there are two types of notices of non-discrimination, and each has their own specific requirements? So we have the annual notice of non-discrimination, and we also have the continuous notice of non-discrimination. Throughout the presentation, I'll be referring to them as the AN and the CN, so I don't have to keep saying annual and continuous. So Brittany has very helpfully put into the chat the document that I will be using as sort of a guide for the beginning of this presentation. So it's this document right here. So if you want to open that as well and follow along, if that makes more sense for you, please feel free to do so. She has put that in the chat, as I said. Okay, so first up, we're going to be talking about the annual notice of non-discrimination. The source of the requirement for the annual notice is in the guidelines, section 4-0. So if you want to go to the guidelines and look at the
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm here. Hello?
Hello? Is someone talking?
I think
Did you
that
have a
might
question?
have been a mistake there.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so if you want to go to the guidelines, which again is linked, please feel free to do so if you want to check out the specific requirements for the annual notice, but all of them are stated here within the presentation. So, okay, so there are three basic elements, and those numbers up at the top are referring to the specific numbers here on the notice of the top 10 doc. So the three basic elements of the annual notice are that it must state that the community college does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, or disability. It must include a brief description of program offerings and admission criteria. And below that, I put an example because this is one of the things that always seem to cause some issue at the institutions that we visited. You know, they were thinking very specifically in terms of, I have to list out every single program that we have here and the specific admissions criteria for each. That's not the case. If you're, depending on where your annual notice is, it can either be referring to a page number or you can include a website link. So the little blurb there underneath is a good reference for you. The annual notice must also include the name, address, and phone number or numbers for the Title IX and Section 504 coordinator or coordinators. The reason why I have the S in parentheses is because that can be the same person, but might not necessarily be. Okay, so publication of the annual notice. The college must disseminate the annual notice on an annual basis prior to the beginning of each school year to students, parents, employees, and the general public. It must be made available to formats that are accessible to individuals with disabilities. And the Office for Civil Rights generally believes it's acceptable to publish the annual notice only on the college's website. Typically, the college's website, since it is a public-facing website, is accessible to individuals with disabilities, not always. I think since COVID, institutions and just organizations in general have gotten a lot better about accessibility. It's been brought more to the forefront when people are trying to digitally access things. So again, it is generally acceptable to publish the AN only on the college's website. If the college service area contains a community of national origin minority persons with limited English language skills, the annual notice must be disseminated to that community in its language. The annual notice must also state that the college will take steps to assure that the lack of English language skills will not be a barrier to admission and participation. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip this. Actually, you know what? No, we'll go ahead and do it. Okay. So is anything missing from the following annual notice of non-discrimination? Note, Sample Community College District contains a population of individuals with limited English language skills. Sample Community College does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, sex, disability, religion, sexual orientation, or age in its educational programs, activities, services, or employment practices. Inquiries regarding discrimination in any of these areas may be directed to the Title IX or Section 504 coordinator at phone number or at email. So the question is there anything missing? The answer to that is yes, there are things missing. Those specific things are here in bold. So what it should read is Sample Community College does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, religion, sexual orientation, or age in educational programs, activities, and services or employment practices. So national origin was left out, but they did include religion, sexual orientation, and age. Those are not under the MOA program, federally protected under civil rights laws. So age is protected under its own civil rights law. For post-secondary, we don't review compliance with the Age Discrimination Act, but they do in secondary. So it's a good practice. So that's why religion, sexual orientation, and age are all in italics because they're optional for these purposes. The other thing that was left out is the reference to program offerings and admission criteria. So this specific example of the annual notice is in the college's catalog or handbook or something like that. That's why it's referencing a page number. It also did not include the notice that the lack of English language skills won't be a barrier to admission and participation in programs or services, because if you remember, there was a note up there at the top of the last slide saying that there is a community of those individuals in this community college's district. Also, for the annual notice, you must include the name and physical address of the Title IX and or Section 504 coordinator. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide. All right, so now we'll review the requirements for the continuous notice of non-discrimination. So the sources of requirement for continuous notice of non-discrimination come from several places, from Title VI, Title IX, and also Section 504. And those specific references are included there if you wish to view them. So there are two basic elements to the continuous notice. It must state that the community college does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, or disability. And it must include the names or titles, address, phone number, email address for the Title IX and Section 504 coordinators. For publication of the continuous notice, so where should the continuous notice be published? Pretty much everywhere. I put some examples here on the slide, but anything that is internal, anything that is public facing whatsoever needs to have some sort of continuous notice on it. So application forms, handbooks, catalogs, recruitment materials, newsletters, the website, any sort of electronic forms, hiring materials and job postings. Anywhere you can think of, just go ahead and slap that continuous notice on there. Can you combine the annual and continuous notice into one? answer is yes, with some stipulations. So you can use a combined notice, but you must make sure it meets all the requirements and regulations of the annual and continuous notice. Seems pretty obvious, right? Just as a reminder, this might not be a best practice, because if you think of, for example, think of a job posting. So typically that document is a shorter document, limited space. If you're thinking, you think about posting something on the newspaper, typically when you post things in the newspaper, they charge you by word, I believe, either word or letter. I'm pretty sure it's word. But if you're using that as an example, thinking back to the criteria that are required for the annual notice, you need to have that whole thing posted everywhere. So it's a lot easier if you have one annual notice that you're posting in at least one place. And then the continuous notice is a lot shorter, that you can post everywhere else. So the continuous notice is 2 lines versus the annual notice, it's going to be 5, 6, 7 lines. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so true or false? The continuous notice of non-discrimination does not have to be included within job postings or newsletters. False. The continuous notice does need to be included within job postings or newsletters. And it's a best practice to place these notices in as many places as possible to reach as many people as possible. All right, this slide is has a link to the ilcivilrightsreview.com website, and that's where we have these top 10 documents. We have a lot of other great resources. It's broken out by facilities, administrators, students. So depending on who you are, you can go to that website and find the area that most reflects your position within the institution. So the next of our webinar series is on Thursday, March 21st from 10 to 10:30, and that's web accessibility. So I hope you can join us for that. And the contact info for myself, Dr. Amy Julian, and then Brittany Boston, who are both with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, are included in this slide. Thank you so much, and I hope that you learned a lot.